Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. IRS ready for the upcoming tax season. Last minute changes to tax laws included in IRS forms and instructions. IR 2021-10, January 12th, 2021, Washington. The Internal Revenue Service today assured taxpayers and tax professionals that updates to key federal tax forms and instructions are complete and will be available when Americans begin filing their tax returns. So obviously we had some last minute adjustments that could have an impact to the 2020 taxes. Most notably might be the second economic impact payment that went out and the recovery rebate credit that could be impacted on the tax returns as well. So obviously they may have to make some adjustments to the forms and the instructions related to those forms, and we need them pretty soon because filing is going to be taking place at some point very soon. So back to the text. Most individual taxpayers file IRS Form 1040 or Form 1040-SR. There's a link to those forms here. Once they receive Forms W-2 and other earning information from their employers and payers, IRS has incorporated recent changes to the tax laws into the forms and instructions. There's a link to the instructions here, and shared the updates with its partners who develop the software used by individuals and tax professionals to prepare and file their returns. So obviously every year we got this kind of issue that all the updates need to be updated so that we can get the instructions that can be found on the IRS website, but also the software providers, which is what many people depend on to do their tax returns, and many tax professionals depend on to help them with their tax returns, obviously need to be updated as well. So Forms 1040 and 1040-SR and the associated instructions are available now on IRS.gov, IRS.gov, the IRS website, and are being printed for taxpayers who need a hard copy. Economic impact payments, EIPs, are an advance payment of the recovery rebate credit. So that's where you're going to have a lot of confusion or a lot of questions about most likely this year. That's going to be unique because we never had this before in prior years. Remember that the economic impact payments went out during the year, during 2020. 2 rounds of them that went out. One was quite recent. The economic impact payments can be thought of as basically something that's kind of linked to the 2020 tax return, which we will be filing in 2021, linked in that it's kind of like the recovery rebate credit, but they kind of gave an advancement. The economic impact payment you can think of as basically an advancement of the recovery rebate credit based on whatever information the IRS had, which would be on the prior year tax return, 2019 if they have it, 2018 if they didn't, at least for the first round. And then they still tried to pick up information based on other information, such as Social Security payments and other government payments, if they didn't have those two things to send out the payments. If anything was wrong, then the goal was to fix it here. So if there's any underpayments, then it's supposed to be reconciled with the use of the recovery rebate credit. So, and that's going to be tied to the 2020 tax return. So important updates include the recovery rebate credit worksheet on page 59 of the Form 1040-1040-SR instructions. Anyone who didn't receive the full amount of both the economic impact payments should include the amounts they received before any offsets when they file. Anyone who received the full amount for both economic impact payments should not include any information about the advance payments when they file their tax return. So in other words, if you got the proper economic impact payment, then you shouldn't be getting the recovery. You know, it should be good, it should be easy to file. Hopefully that most people fall into that category. But if your economic impact payment was not correct, based on the information the IRS had or whatnot, then that's when the recovery rebate credit will come into play here. So if everything worked as it should, then you would think you wouldn't basically need to do anything, right? And if it didn't work as it should, then you would think that the tax return would have the reconciliation process. But again, check out the instructions on the Form 1040 if you got questions about that item. And if you're a tax preparer, I would look into that item because I would expect questions that we haven't seen in prior tax years related to it. So also new this year is the option to use prior year income amounts when computing the earned income tax credit and the additional child tax credit. The IRS has not yet announced a start date for the 2021 filing season. IRS Free File, there's a link to that here, will be open in mid-January when participating providers begin accepting returns. So if you're going to be looking into, or if you know someone that might be looking into a tax preparation process, then they can look into the IRS website, which is the IRS Free File, to see if that would be an option for them. There's a link to that here. The IRS free file providers will accept completed tax returns and hold them until they can be filed electronically with the IRS. Latest economic impact payments are automatic for eligible taxpayers. This month, the Treasury Department and the IRS are sending the second round of economic impact payments to millions of Americans as part of the implementation of the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. So taxpayers don't need to take any action to receive these payments. So again, the second economic impact payment should be going out, and you can't, there's nothing to do about it at this point in time, because really what they did is they took the same kind of requirements from the first economic impact payment. They've done everything they can to basically get the information necessary to send out those economic payments, and they're not going to do anything to kind of reconcile the process now. They're just going to overlay all the information they have this time on what they did last time, and then any problems that are taking place in either the first or second economic impact payments then should be adjusted and reconciled shortly with the tax filing of the 2020 taxes that happens in 2021. Now, obviously, there is kind of an issue with that for those people that don't normally file a tax return, because they're not required to file a tax return. If they didn't receive the economic impact payment, at this point, there's the thing to do to fix that would be to actually file the tax return, even if they're not normally needing to do so that they can get access to the recovery rebate credit. That's typically going to be the adjustment, as far as I can tell at this point in time, if there are any problems with either number 1 or number 2 of the economic impact payments. You may be able to get access to file the 2020 tax return with resources from the IRS, including the free file options and possibly other options to get help and support in filing your tax returns or helping others to do so if necessary. So economic impact payments are automatic for eligible taxpayers who filed a 2019 tax return and those who receive Social Security retirement, survivor or disability benefits, SSDI, railroad retirement benefits, supplemental security income, SSI, and veteran affairs beneficiaries who didn't file a tax return. So really, if they had the information about the person, they tried to send out the economic impact payment, even if they didn't file the 2019 tax return. But again, if there are any problems, then you're going to have to file most likely the 2020 tax return and 2021 to get the recovery rebate credit to rectify the problem. So these second round of payments follow the successful delivery of more than $270 billion in CARES Act, C-A-R-E-S Act, economic impact payments to about 160 million Americans in 2020. Eligible individuals who did not receive an economic impact payment, either the first or second payment, can claim a recovery rebate credit when they file their 2020 taxes this year. The IRS urges taxpayers who didn't receive an advance payment to review the eligibility criteria when they file their 2020 taxes. Many people, including recent college graduates, may be eligible for the credit. So remember, the people that didn't get the credit, the people that might have fallen through the cracks, when they issued out the credit, they basically gave it to everybody who had like an ID number, a valid number like a Social Security number, and then there's going to be an income level phase out. But the people who had lesser payments or maybe no payment at all would be dependents. So if you were a dependent, then you may have gotten a $500 addition to the person who was claiming the dependent if the dependent was a qualifying child that was under the age of 17. If you're talking about a dependent over the age of 17, which would we'd be thinking about students most likely, oftentimes that are going to school, which could be claimed as a dependent still, but are over 17, or possibly other dependents, possibly other people, elderly people might be a dependent as well. Parents, grandparents could be a dependent. They may not have gotten any benefit to either the person who was claiming them as a dependent or to the individual themselves. Now, if in 2020, possibly they are not a dependent for whatever reason. For example, the student no longer is a dependent because now they're self-sufficient. If you have someone who is now self-sufficient, not being claimed as a dependent by somebody else on someone else's tax return, then possibly they would qualify for the credit, but they didn't get it because in the prior year, they were claimed as a dependent, so no one benefited. But now in 2020, maybe they're independent, filing their own tax return, and if so, you would think under those criteria, which is what the credit is based on, because before it was a prepayment, they may be eligible then for the credit. So you want to keep those situations in mind when you're thinking about your taxes basically this year. You want to say, okay, if I'm independent this year and I was dependent last year, well then maybe I qualify for the recovery rebate credit and I didn't get the economic impact payment because of the prior information. Maybe I'll get it this time around because I'm filing my own taxes independently, not as a dependent. Okay, so eligible individuals who didn't receive the full amount of both the economic impact payments should claim the missing amount as a credit. Anyone who did receive the full amount for both economic impact payments should not include any information about the payment when they file their taxes. So hopefully, if everything worked out properly for most people, then it's taxes being done as normal, right? You got the economic impact payment that you should have got. For most people, it'll be fairly basic. It's those AGI limitations that'll kind of mess things up, and the dependent kind of situation, if there were changes to it or if the IRS didn't have the information about them, they could kind of mess things up most likely. So they've already received the full amount of the recovery rebate credit as an advance payment in the form of the economic impact payment, so nothing needs to be done if that is the situation. For the latest IRS forms and instructions, you can visit the IRS website at www.irs.gov/forms. There's a link to that here. Please visit the IRS.gov, IRS.gov for the latest information about the economic impact payments and filing your 2020 tax return. There's links to those locations here. There'll be a link to this in the description.